Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back for the next talk. Up next, we have Christian from Gaming Science with possibly my favourite title of the day. Quote, "I think this could work," end quote. Analytical thinking and performance in esports. Christian, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can indeed. If you'd like to take it away, please feel free.
All right. Thank you very much. Analytical thinking is where the meat and potatoes lie is a quote from my study on higher cognitive processes and performance in esports. And in the study, I investigated the engagement of cognitive processes during gameplay, its link to performance, and group differences between esports athlete and recreational gamers. In esports athletes face the constant need for smart decision making, create and adapt strategies, and think strategically to perform at a very high level. All of these are higher order cognitive processes. In the current study, I call them type 2 processes, and they're in accordance with the dual process theory, which is the theoretical framework I'm using for the study. The dual process theory framework is a very good framework for understanding human behavior across various fields, such as sports, finance, medicine, and architecture. And it typically distinguishes between two types of thinking. The first one is type 1 thinking, which is very fast, intuitive, and unconscious. For instance, if I ask you what's 1 plus 1, you don't have to think about it, you just immediately have the answer. Whereas type 2 cognitive processes are deliberate, slow, conscious, and very analytical. So again, if I ask you what's 255 times 1107, then you have to start in engaging in analytical thinking. Type 2 processing is also required when dealing with novel and important problems and situations. And it has been shown to be a very useful framework for analyzing cognitive processes and performance in sports before. Research has started to explore cognitive and cognition-related factors and their link to performance in esports, such as cognitive abilities, cognitive styles, and skills. However, the cognitive processes underlying performance in esports are still unclear. Therefore, a deeper understanding of how type 2, so the very slow and conscious processes, are linked to performance in gaming is therefore a gap in the literature. In addition, previous research has employed the dual process theory framework. However, they have severe methodological limitations. For instance, most of them are post hoc interviews, so they interview the people after the actual performance episode. And they also use inductive thematic analysis, or they use data from laboratory settings. Furthermore, previous research has never quantified these type 2 processes, meaning we don't know how much people or any participants actually use. And they also have never been comparing groups, so higher performing or lower performing groups. In response to these gaps, the study has 4 objectives. The first one is to quantify type 2 processes during performance episodes. Second, compare esports athletes and recreational gamers. Number 3, examine the link between type 2 processes and performance. And number 4, gain a deeper understanding of how type 2 processes in esports are employed. To achieve the objectives of the study, I choose a qualitative empirical approach, and I'm combining audio-visual ethnography and semi-constructed interviews. In total, I conducted 40 matches and coded them, which adds up to over 21 hours of competitive gameplay. And these results were triangulated with 6 interviews from esports athletes and recreational gamers. The game I chose for this study was Teamfight Tactics. Teamfight Tactics is an auto battler where one gamer competes against 7 other gamers, and the goal is to be the last one standing. I found that both groups of gamers vocalize almost an identical amount of type 2 processes during their performance episodes. However, esports athletes vocalize about 17.4 more words per minute. The table you can see on the screen shows the quantified results of each type 2 cognitive process category and also uncertainty for esports athlete and recreational gamers. And the results are also adjusted for the difference in words per minute. I would like to bring your attention to the orange fields. As you can see, reasoning, analytical thinking, rationalizing, and hypothetical thinking were the most employed type 2 processes in both groups. The difference between the groups is shown on the right side, and you can see that esports athletes employ more reasoning, but less analytical thinking, rationalization, and hypothetical thinking. And with regards to vocalizing uncertainty, both groups are about equal. Now let's take a closer look at each type 2 process and gain a deeper understanding of how they are used by the gamers during competitive gameplay. First, let's talk about learning. Learning includes learning from mistakes or new skills. And although perceived as very important, vocalized processes of learning are rarely expressed during the competitive gameplay in both groups. And the interview results have shown that learning actually appears most of the time outside the game through watching VODs, watching streams, or getting feedback and discussing with coaches and other players. Reasoning includes changes in initial responses or deductive reasoning or hypothesizing. And during gameplay, both groups reason over making strategic decisions, such as choosing a unit composition, choosing the right item, or when to level up. Moreover, they also reason about when to adapt their strategy, especially in order to stay in the game when pressure appears, such as facing elimination. So when someone is in last place and facing elimination, then he will reason to adapt the strategy. And reasoning was also employed to replace an initial intuition they had. So if they have a gut feeling, which would something like a type 1 cognitive process, then they start reasoning and think about the process if this is actually the right thing to do or not. Analytical thinking is basically where the meat and potatoes lie of TFT lies. So this is also the title of the study. And it shows that analytical thinking is very important, and it was highlighted to be very important during the interviews. And it was also highlighted to be a performance factor that was believed to make the difference between low and high ranked players. So out of all these type 2 processes, this appears to be the most important one. Furthermore, the interview stated that esports athletes were believed to be better at analytical thinking compared to their recreational counterparts. Analytical thinking was also needed for specific in-game behaviors, such as collecting information, which is typically called scouting, which is players looking at the other player's board to gather information. It's also used for evaluating different alternatives they have, strategic choices, etc. Also for analyzing the situation they're currently in. It's also used for directing attention towards a specific task, such as positioning their units correctly, choosing the right items, or prioritizing tasks they have to do within a specific turn. And lastly, it was realizing and reflecting on mistakes with regard to decision making. So whenever they made a, let's say, bad call or bad decision, they then started reflecting on what they could have done better and what happened. Within analytical thinking, there were also some group differences that were stated during the interviews. For instance, recreational gamers played more for fun, whereas esports athletes had the motivation to climb and get better. And recreational gamers also seeked out off-game data, something like guides or from watching videos, and also scouted less compared to the esports athletes. The next type 2 process is rationalization. This includes verifying or falsifying an intuition on how to progress in the game. During gameplay, this is mostly included stating what gamers are going to do without any further explanation. So again, if someone has a gut feeling, type 1 process, then they would just state what they do, and this stating would then lead to them thinking about it, but not explaining why they would do it. The next one is hypothetical thinking. This includes thinking ahead or considering the implication of certain decisions. Esports athletes and recreational gamers stated that hypothetical thinking was necessary across all game stages, so early game, mid game, and late game, and also on the macro level, which includes the broad strategic decision they have to take often at the start of the game, and also at the micro level, which is very round specific unit placement, for instance. Hypothetical thinking was mostly used to think ahead, so future potential outcomes, and then create a plan based on that. The process of evaluating different game plans appeared to rely on analytical thinking sub-processes, such as collecting information and analyzing the situation. So hypothetical thinking appears to need analytical thinking, and they are kind of intertwined so they can actually work together and get a good result for the gamer itself. During the gameplay, players also reflect on past decisions and how these different decisions would have alternated outcomes. So if someone makes a mistake, then reflect on it, and then they think back on what they could have done better, and then reflect into the future how the game would then have looked otherwise. The next one is rule-based thinking. This includes following specific rules or routines or plans the players may have. However, this rarely occurred during the gameplay. And the interview results suggest that guidelines and game rules exist, but they become automatic over time the more the people engage in the game. Interestingly, players have to be willing to break these rules once they reach a certain level, whereas recreational gamers, which are lower ranked gamers, stick more to these rules and follow online guides. So in order to perform at a high level, people have to be willing to break the rules, come up with new strategies, alternate from guides or established rules in order to get a better result within the game. Lastly, there was uncertainty. Uncertainty was vocalized to an equal amount by both groups. However, it was found that recreational gamers and esports athletes expressed them through questions. So a player would ask themselves a question. This would be something that is uncertain to them. And this would actually lead them to engage in type 2 processes. So uncertainty and asking themselves questions could be seen as a gateway to the engagement of type 2 processes. From the interviews, there were some additional findings that emerged. The first one was that TFT is a competitive, complex, dynamic, and cognitively taxing game, which makes it a very good candidate to study individual level performance and cognition. Second, although type 2 processes were seen as more important for performance, the interviews also mentioned that type 1 processes, which is the automatic way of processing things, also contributes to performance. Third, streaming impacts the engagement in type 2 processes and performance. More specifically, vocalizing their thoughts helped both of the players to learn, remember mistakes, review their own game plan, and then also engage in analytical thinking. In this sense, streaming made them more conscious about their decisions and was highlighted to be beneficial for the performance of esports athletes. However, for recreational gamers, streaming was perceived as more of a cognitively demanding and sometimes distractive task and could therefore be negatively affecting their performance. To conclude, the type 2 cognitive processes, analytical thinking, rationalization, hypothetical thinking, and reasoning were vocalized to be the most, were the most vocalized during competitive gameplay by esports athletes and recreational gamers. And analytical thinking and reasoning specifically were perceived as being important for performance. Similarly, learning was mentioned to be important too, but this predominantly happened outside the actual game. Furthermore, group differences were found in the study. Esports athletes were perceived to be using more analytical thinking and being better at it, which ultimately contributed to the difference in performance between the two groups. The results also suggested that recreational gamers use less Type 2 processes and more Type 1 processes. Uncertainty, which was asking themselves questions, triggered the engagement in various Type 2 processes. And lastly, streaming had both a positive and also negative on performance and the engagement in Type 2 processes. However, it depends on the actual group. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to your questions and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. We do have a couple questions. If I'd jump right in, if that's okay. Dad EFX says, "I wonder to what extent is the purpose of training to minimize the occurrence of T2 thinking in a competitive setting?"
So, minimizing Type 2 processing? If I heard you correctly?
Yes.
Yeah. So I had one esports athlete say that he's actually training to minimize his Type 2 processing because whenever you get in a pressureful situation, he said that he's struggling with overthinking and not following what he should actually do when like training. And so he's putting himself in a situation that is very pressureful and force him to just focus on his Type 1 thinking, which is like very automatic and just following his gut feelings. However, some of the other participants said that they prefer Type 2 thinking, but they also mentioned that they're typically the person who like overthinks or thinks a lot. So it appears that there's a difference between individuals, and whatever your category you fit in and what your goals are, then you probably not want to follow into this footstep of reducing Type 2 thinking, which is important for performance. But again, one person said that they are actually trying or training to minimize this effect.
Interesting. I suppose it's just down to individual differences at that point then.
Yeah.
Daddy FX did continue. What are the skills or knowledge that should operate at T1? And from a pedagogy perspective, what are your sight words and multiplication tables for each title?
So the first one was skills that can be needed for Type 1. I have no idea.
That's correct.
Yeah. And none of the participants said anything specific to that. And the study also focused more on the Type 2. So that would be a very different question and research question, and something I cannot answer. I'm very sorry for that. And the second was related to the processes themselves, right?
What are your sight words and multiplication tables? Yeah.
Yeah. So my sight words, I don't know if I understand the question correctly. What kind of sight words? what it specifically refers to.
I'm not sure. Daddy Effects, if you want to jump into the Twitch chat and explain a little bit more, then please feel free. That's more of a metaphor. It is a reframing of the first question. Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
There you go. In that case, thank you very much for that, Christian. As you do have the next slot as well, are you okay to just jump straight into that?
Absolutely, we can do that.
Lovely. Yes, thank you very much for your questions, everybody in chat. I hope you're enjoying the talk so far. After Christian has completed his next talk, we will be jumping over to a Germany's University Esports panel with Tobias Schultz. But before we do that, like I said, Christian has his next talk on the categorical Wild West, the need to establish standards. So once you're set up with that, Christian, feel free to take it away.